Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, American Family Insurance, Delivering Business Value from Governance Programs with Alation. As the title suggests, today you will learn how American Family Insurance is using analytic stewardship to drive greater business value and how they are leveraging Alation to help them do that. Before we get started, let me discuss the agenda for today. We're going to have about 60 minutes of content today, including Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter those into the box on your screen. As you're listening to the webinar, feel free to share your thoughts. You can tweet at us at Alation on Twitter and hashtag data catalog to make sure everybody can see that conversation as it's happening. If you'd like to get in contact with Alation directly, you can reach us at alation.com/learn-more. And shortly after the webinar, replay to everybody who attended today, so you can share that with your colleagues or get a chance to watch that again. Now to introduce today's speakers. From American Family Insurance, we have Amy Keelty, who's Information Strategy and Governance Director, and Susannah Barnes, who's Information Governance Standards, Governance and Quality Specialist. And from Alation, we have Mitesh Shah, Vice President of Product Marketing. So to kick things off, I will hand it over to Mitesh.
All right, thank you, Nolan. And to those of you on the webinar, thank you for joining and listening in today. We have an exciting discussion here coming up with Amy and Susannah talking about how to drive business value from your governance programs or from their governance programs in particular. Before we do that, I wanted to kick things off just by setting up a little bit of the context here, the problem statement. And since we are talking about governance, you might think that we can start with maybe a clean definition of governance. But for those of you that are in the know, you know that that could take an hour in and of itself. So instead, what we've done is really provided a framework around what some of the objectives are for organizations around their governance programs. And you see that framework here as a Venn diagram. On the left, you have some of the drivers around governance being to reduce risk or mitigate risk. An example of that might be compliance and regulations such as GDPR, for example. And that is really around using data appropriately and making sure that data is being used in a compliant manner, for example. Again, that's about reducing and mitigating risk. There are other examples that we'll see in just a bit. But on the right, you see a bucket around increasing business value. So examples of that might be to improve your decision making through making your decisions on sound and the best and most appropriate data possible. So again, these are just sort of broad buckets, but you can see, of course, this is a Venn diagram. These are not mutually exclusive categories. There is a category here in the middle, in the intersection of the two circles, and that is really where I think the smartest organizations, data literate organizations, live or want to live, which is sort of balancing these two drivers, these two objectives, both reducing risk and increasing business value. So those are the drivers, but for those of you that are on the call, you know that governance broadly often results in sort of failure at worst, and at best simply missing sort of the key objectives that you have out of these governance programs. And why is that? So let's take a look at that. On the left-hand side, again, we have the reducing risk and mitigating risk. One reason for that might be some of the regulations and the compliance frameworks that exist. The controls, the articles, et cetera, around these regulations are not necessarily always consistent with one another. And so there is confusion around potentially which way to proceed. And even within a single regulation or a single compliance framework, you might have controls that are often inconsistent with one another. So that's just one example of a reason that, that governance programs fail, and the objective is really around compliance or regulatory requirements. On the other side, you have increasing business value. Why does governance fail in that case? Well, we've seen tools that are really targeted towards and marketed towards increasing business value, but in fact, they're largely oriented to more technical audiences, potentially information technology in particular, and as a result, they're just not business-friendly tools, and they just don't see the level of adoption that you need across the organization to really drive that business value for your governance programs. As you recall, there is this intersection of the Venn diagram that the smarter organizations, the data-literate organizations want to live. And as luck would have it, I think we have really identified a path to success to actually drive business value from your governance programs. And we want to share some of that over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So what does that path to success look like? We've actually done a lot of research here at Alation, talking to a good portion of our customer base to understand what their governance programs look like and what some of the challenges are. And from that, from those conversations, we have identified a gap between policy definition, basically defining and setting policies on the left side, and adhering to those policies on the right. And if you set policies in your organizations, you probably can see why that's the case. It's not hard to see why. It is often the case that you've got governance boards and governance teams that are setting policies, and they know the policies well because they know the regulations and the compliance requirements quite well, but they are away from the data, and so they don't know exactly how policies may apply to data in that specific context. And on the other side, you've got potentially analysts and data scientists and others that are doing their best. They want to adhere to policies, but they're not necessarily sure what those policies are because those policies aren't really exposed to them in the right time, in the right place, and in the context of the data. So there is that gap, and what we've really noticed when speaking to customers is that that gap is being filled by people. These people, what I would dub the unsung heroes of data governance, or unsung heroes of governance, and those people are the stewards, the analytics stewards in particular. The stewards are folks that are closest, often closest to the data, and they're able to take the policies coming from the governance boards, and they are able to apply those policies to the data and ultimately surface those policies to the analysts and data scientists and others so that they can best adhere to them. But that, of course, does not come for free. There are challenges that the stewards themselves face, as we've discovered when speaking to our customers, and those are the challenges that you see here on the screen. Starting, and I'll just cover these one by one very quickly, but you'll hear more from Susannah in particular later in the conversation about how they solve for these. Those challenges are really starting with scaling the stewardship resources. Often it is the case that stewards are part-time resources, and they may be increasing ever so slightly over time, and organizations are focusing more on hiring more stewards. But at the same time, you've got an explosion of data that is making it very hard for stewards to keep up and steward and curate that data over time. So it's very hard for them to know where to prioritize their efforts to know that they're having the most impact in the organization when it comes to policy application in particular. The second challenge is around connecting policy to action in the daily workflow. What we've discovered here is that policies are often communicated via email, by internal wikis, for example, maybe even in hallway conversations. It's just completely away from the data, and that makes it very hard for analysts in particular to sort of pick up those policies and adhere to them when the policies could be sitting in a variety of different locations. The third is around really engagement and keeping stewards engaged. And the reason for that is, again, going back to point number one around the mountain of data. How do the stewards know that their efforts are really having an impact in the organization? They're setting the policies, but is there anything actionable? Is there anything actually happening with those policies? Are the analysts following those policies? And so it's about being able to see the impact that their work is having across the organization. So those are three big challenges that have been surfaced to us at Alation, and three big challenges that we've worked to solve over the past 18 months or so. But you'll hear more about that from Susannah in particular in just a few moments. The fourth is really around getting guided help, and that just relates to stewardship, governance. Governance is not necessarily a new concept, but stewardship might be, and so it's not always easy to know exactly how to get the process flow right between the various stakeholders in the organization. So organizations we've seen sort of just need a little bit of guidance on how to get that process right. With that, I'm going to introduce Amy here in just a second. Here we've got American Family Insurance speaking. American Family Insurance has been a customer of ours for just under 18 months or so. And they've had huge success, I think, in two areas. One is around governance, and one is really around the use of Alation. And I think they've had that success for two reasons in particular. One is that they're able to improve and iterate on what may not be working. You'll hear more about that from Amy in just a second, where they thought about governance in one way, a traditional way early on, but then shifted gears into a better approach that really incorporates stewards, and had much greater success out of their governance program as a result of that. The second, they've actually, as it relates to Alation, they've gone from, I think, just over 200 users of Alation early on to around 450 or so more recently, nearly doubling their user base here. And I think that's a big part of that is because they're leveraging Alation not for sort of this traditional use case around analyst productivity, well, that's part of it, but also they're really thinking more broadly about how to use it for governance and stewardship, which we'll hear about more in that, where we're seeing that trend really across a number of different customers as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce Amy Keelty from American Family Insurance. Take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mitesh, and welcome to this webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about American Family and the challenges and opportunities we see across our governance program, and then Susannah is going to dive into the details on how Alation has helped us through that. American Family, I'm not sure all of you have heard of American Family Insurance. Just a few years ago, we had been a agent-only insurance company that was focused in 19 states. But over the last few years, we've done some major acquisitions of insurance companies that has put us on a national stage. Additionally, as you can see along the left, along the right, you can see how we've done some acquisition of some technology companies as well. So American Family is really in an exciting space, and we're excited for all the opportunities that our enterprise has put in front of us. Our data management journey started in 2013 at American Family. And like other companies, we were looking to address a few objectives. We want to make sure that we have standards and practices in place that allow for accurate and timely data. We wanted to make sure that our teams were building out accurate solutions, and we wanted to implement data quality inside those. And this was in an effort to really improve our analytic capabilities. We realized that American Family has lots of opportunity around data, and our mantra from our CEO all the way down is, how do we become data-driven? We need to focus on the data that we have at hand and ensuring that it's accurate, timely, and it's the best information we have for those decision-making processes. Finally, we wanted to make sure we had people dedicated to this effort. So having people in a part-time position or doing it when it was convenient or they had time on their calendar just wasn't going to work for us. We knew that we had a larger opportunity to endeavor. As Mitesh mentioned earlier, there are drivers around governance. And as he also mentioned, we could probably fill volumes on what governance means to different companies or different individuals at different times. But really, the two components that we focus on are around that reducing risk and increasing business value. And we had some very specific examples of how we needed to address those items at American Family. So from a risk perspective, we want to make sure that we are not keeping information or holding on to information that isn't useful or could put us in a sticky situation sometimes if we have it, or we keep it too long. It helps with costs, whether that's storage or maintenance. So we wanted to make sure that we are looking at our retention efforts, and those are identified and executed upon to make sure that we aren't keeping information around for too long. As I'm sure everyone is aware, we have, some have GDPR or California or both regulations that are coming forward or are soonly effective. We need to make sure that we have processes in place to address those. And then being an insurance company, we also are involved in many legal discussions, a lot of practices around our claims, where we need to ensure that we are using the right information at the right time to make the best decisions. From a business value perspective, we are really focused on efficiency, automation, doing the right things at the right time, as cheap and as quick as possible. We realize that there's always a need for individual decisions and people decisions, but those things that can be standardized or automated, we really want to focus on building those out in order to ensure our profitable success as an insurance company. And I think the place that we are in right now is right in the middle of that, which is digital transformation with a focus on data literacy. So American Family is in really exciting times for anyone who thinks insurance is exciting. As I mentioned before, with our acquisitions, we definitely have opportunity across those individual operating companies, and we really look to where we can maximize our opportunities around around consistency and around those operating companies. So when we first brought in our data governance practices, we really built it out from the top down. So we identified I wouldn't say rigid, but relatively rigorous framework. We identified exactly what the organization would look like, that would be used to implement governance and quality. And we didn't go about it with business buy-in. We took the approach of, here's our framework and this is what we're going to implement. And we ran into some issues and challenges, as Mitesh discovered or talked about earlier as well, where we have people who are identified as data stewards, but they didn't all necessarily know accountabilities, and it was really difficult to, it's easy to, not easy, but you can pull together a policy which encompasses all the right things to do at the right times. But if you aren't able to share that information, get buy-in and execution from everyone who's accountable, then you're not taking the right approach, or you're not really getting the job done that you want to get done. So it was important that our people and our individuals were involved, and that was a gap we had coming out of the gate. From an implementation perspective, although we did have, we did and do have a number of policies written, there's a certain amount of manual work to monitor those and then report those out. So as I mentioned earlier, when we want to focus on efficiency and automation, this was a challenge that we had faced because we hadn't pulled together automation for these types of processes. And then as an example, that was also previously mentioned about how sometimes organizations bring in what they think is best for a business area. Sometimes they do that without actually asking anyone. You do what you think is best at the right time. It allows you to do things quicker, but it also creates the chance that you might be missing the mark. So when we brought in some of the tools at American Family, specifically around metadata, we didn't necessarily have our business user buy-in. We didn't go through multiple POCs originally. We brought in a tool that had some pretty technical metadata, which was good for some things like finding lineage, but it wasn't as great for business users sharing some of the knowledge that they have, some of just sharing queries across different data sets. They didn't have the opportunity to collaborate with each other, to share that information, to document it, and to get that knowledge outside of either some of the applications they either had it saved in or just they it was just sitting in their brains. So we didn't have those opportunities, and we didn't reach out to our business users before bringing in that tool. So we kind of took a new approach. We realized the position that we were in and wanted to make sure that we were doing what was best for the organization. Sometimes it's hard to look back and reflect on things that didn't go quite right, but we wanted to do just that, even though it's difficult, and move together collaboratively forward with our business partners and anyone affected by our data governance processes in tow. So we pulled together a group of individuals who are accountable for data across our lines of business. Just a quick, American Family is organized in a way that, like probably many insurance companies are, where we have a IT division, and then we have specific lines of business such as auto, life, homeowners, commercial lines broken out, and then we also have areas, customer marketing, sales, those types of things. Each of those areas have their own data needs. So, and there are leaders in each of those organizations that are focused on bringing the right data to the right people at the right times. So we wanted to bring those individuals together and start to talk about what do we need as a data-driven organization, as opposed to what we previously had was either no inclusion from them at all, or they were only focused on their own personal line of business. So when we brought that group together and started talking about opportunities our organization had, we realized that many, if not all of them, were plagued by common things. One of them happened to be the information around what we would put in a data catalog. So any sort of metadata around any of the data sets that were being built across the organization. This included data sets that were IT built. And then we also have many data sets that are built out in our business areas as well, because they have the knowledge and the prowess to pull that information together across the multiple platforms we have at American Family. And we took the approach of making sure that as we were focused on this common issue, we wanted to take advantage of cost benefits in collaborating and pooling some money. If we did it as an enterprise approach, we could also cut down on the number of people we needed, improve their efficiency, and ultimately solve a problem that spanned the business groups with one set of individuals. It's possible that many of you or some of you have seen this diagram before. What it does is talk about a day in the life of a business analyst. And just a brief overview of it is making sure that if you kind of follow along the top half, it's a happy path. It's saying, I am in a new role as a data analyst. I have the access I need. I know what data I need, where it is, and that it's of good quality. I can do my analysis and I can tell a story. I'm adding value and I feel great about it. And it's done in a nice, concise time period. If you follow along the bottom half, then you look at someone who moves into a new organization and they don't necessarily have the security they need. They're not sure where their data is. They maybe have to go talk to some people about it, do some trial and error with some, querying some particular information. They realize they don't have the right security. They are talking to individuals about what they know as opposed to having a consolidated space where they can go get those questions answered. Again, trial and error. And then potentially there's quality issues with the data once they actually do have it. So it's this picture has started to identify and really was a driver for a lot of those conversations we had about where do we need to focus our enterprise efforts, and then also what items in this diagram that are red, orange, or yellow can be addressed by our bringing in a data catalog. Another shift we made during this time was to make sure that our individual business users had input. Not only that, American Family, as I mentioned earlier with our consolidation of the multiple operating companies, is really moving towards a self-service data space. So as we bring in our new sources and our new operating companies, we're also building out our data in the cloud. What that gives us is a fresh start for making sure that we have the right information cataloged in the right way. We have our sources identified. We have any business rules identified. We know what security is necessary. We have descriptions of data. All of those things needed in order for that analyst journey to stay in the top half and remain green. So as we were pulling all this information together in the cloud and integrating it, we've also worked with our business area to where they have the responsibility of building data sets on top of those. So we build a foundational area, and then our business users build those customized data sets necessary for their business functions. What we need to do as well is make sure that they are following those governance standards, which we've set forward. And some of those are referenced back in the other slides too, where we look at how are we going to make sure our retention efforts are upheld, and how are we going to make sure things are named appropriately so anybody coming in and using this information can get it quickly and efficiently and make the right decisions and move along on their merry way. One of the other components that we looked at was democratization of data. So we wanted to make sure that people had access to information when they needed it. We didn't want to so tightly control this access when we all work for the same company and all have the company's best interest at heart, that we need to go through painful manual security processes in order for people to get that information that they need. And then ultimately, as it says down here too, really all our business users want is a consistent, solid, accurate, foundational data space so they can do the things they need to do to improve the organization and make sure that we absolutely become that data-driven organization. So part of that as well is to make changes and create some agility and flexibility in our processes. So we saw some changes happening in a couple different ways. As I mentioned earlier, we had a framework that was implemented for our original data governance program, and it involved data stewards, managing data stewards, and data executives. So those, roughly correlate in our organization to executives, vice presidents, and then our managing data stewards were either managers or director, and then our data stewards were identified within each organization as those individuals who could provide guidance and input into our policymaking process, define our business terms, and really address the bullets at the bottom of that square. In addition, and since we've started using our Alation data catalog, we've really found that we have individuals who are playing more of an analytics steward role, which is just a little different than the data steward role on the left, where when we started requesting and populating our Alation catalog, these were individuals who had expressed extreme interest up front because they were such heavy data users. So there were individuals who were identified originally to follow the bottom left-hand bullets, and then there were these people that were kind of self-identifying as, hey, I use data all the time. Yes, I absolutely understand these data sets. We also found that they were spending a lot of time answering questions for other people. So these are the individuals that were really excited about bringing in the catalog because it would help them get what was either in their brain or on a wiki that no one else had access to into a space where they could start to share that information with other individuals across the company. So it was really the creation of the identification of the analytics stewards. And then we also found that with the rigid framework we had previously, that we weren't taking advantage of or even finding a requirement to have an executive in the data governance framework. So we still have data executives across the organization. They're absolutely supportive and are champions of the way we are building out and doing our work, whether it's in IT or our business areas. But what we don't require them to do is sort of have a heavy hand in our processes and review our policies. We just didn't find that that was necessary, that the majority of the work was being accounted for with the managing data stewards. And then finally, just to add a little bit more color to the two different kinds of stewardship we're now seeing at American Family, and then identifying the challenges as well. As Mitesh referenced earlier, we do have the data steward role, and they're accountable for ensuring that we have our standards and policies in place, and they're making decisions about information and our data. They also do reviews around security and access and understanding usage, but that comes with a price. It's hard to memorize every single attribute of every single in the domain of claims data. So we do want to make sure that we're addressing the challenges that our data stewards face. And then secondly, our analytics stewards, which we talked about a little earlier, where they're focused on delivering information. They're accountable for delivering results and information using the data in the organization, which includes providing content and reports and data sets to our executives and anyone who needs to make those decisions across the organization. But then they still have a challenge as well, where is our information? Can I trust it? Can I use it? Do I have security to it? If I don't, how do I obtain that security, or how do I get those answers as I need to deliver this information to our business users across the organization? So with that, I am going to hand it over to Susannah. And she is going to talk about some specifics around how we use Alation to solve these challenges at American Family.
Thanks, Amy. So as Mitesh spoke about earlier, the challenges you see on the screen are some of the ones that stewards regularly face. So on the following slides, I'm going to walk you through what we're doing with Alation specifically to meet some of these challenges. And the first that we'll look at is scaling stewardship and resources. Amy touched on some of the many different aspects of stewardship that we face, whether it's metadata management, data classification, quality monitoring, or access information. Identifying those pieces of information at a conceptual or a logical level can be really challenging, but it's one that you can solve with time and the dedication from different people. But if you want to provide that kind of context for physical data objects, that's where scale really becomes an issue, and you have to find different ways to automate those associations. And so that's where we really start to rely on a data catalog and Alation specifically to achieve that. So we use Alation to connect our business glossary, data classifications, and access information all within one location. We customize the glossary templates to reflect the metadata that we need, including governing areas, privacy requirements, and access information. So you can see that highlighted here. So we're able to extend the catalog to give all of this context on one page. We then take advantage of the built-in learning, machine learning that comes in the catalog to associate the physical objects with our glossary terminology. This is something that we struggled to do in the past. It's very hard to go through thousands of tables and, hundreds of thousands of columns and associate those individually with a single business glossary term. But Alation allows us to discover that information and make those associations in an automated fashion that we just couldn't do in the past. And so having the ability to add that privacy classification information, the governance information, relate those things to the physical data objects all within one page, it really brings together the results of multiple governance policies that we have in one location for end users. And it enables our stewards to review, change, and approve terms and policy information in one place as well. So in the past, when we had that more rigid kind of top-down approach, and prior to having a catalog, we had a very robust approval process documented just for maybe changing a single glossary term. There were a lot of complicated workflows. There were multiple handoffs that included email, SharePoint sites, face-to-face meetings. A lot of times the stewards would delegate the review of the proposals to other people on their teams because they weren't as familiar with the data as those people were. And so that just stretched those timelines out farther and farther. So you can see how we would go through multiple different steps just to get a single approval done. So as we moved into Alation, we're able to manage that workflow completely within the catalog and also make it very transparent. So users can initiate a conversation on the catalog page, right where the term is. They can engage in a discussion, tagging other users as needed, and then the stewards can make the changes directly within the catalog themselves. Because all of this is captured in the versioning of the articles, there's complete transparency of the entire process. So anybody can go in and see what changes have been made and who's changed them and when they were made, and the thought process that was involved in those changes as well. And tracking these requests is pretty straightforward. And automated emails are sent to the stewards when people make requests for changes, or you can also track them within your individual inbox within the tool as well. So it makes it very simple and straightforward for stewards to find the requests that are made of them, to do the work within one location, and to quickly engage within the governance process. Another thing that we really want to do is make sure that we have complete awareness of any kind of defects or quality issues that there might be on tables, and communicating that information in the past was problematic because we had defect systems that tracked issues. We had different quality dashboards in a separate tool, and then we had a distinct metadata repository on top of that. So using Alation and particularly their API library, we can surface all of that information in one place through automation. Defects are being published to the catalog. It's setting flags on those tables so that people know if there's an open defect on an issue. Along the same lines, if quality thresholds aren't being met for certain objects, those tables or columns are being deprecated so that people are given that information on day one. As soon as it happens, those flags are set. And so people are able to leverage that information, not just within the catalog itself, but it's also surfaced in Compose, the SQL editor, and they will trigger email notifications for people as well, so that even if they are not in Alation, they're not querying via Alation, they still get the benefit of that information so that they know if their dashboards might be affected or if their reports might be affected. And it's all really seamless once you have the initial processes put into place. So as we add more content to the catalog, we're focusing more on the quality of what we have there. We're starting to monitor how curated objects are progressing. So we want to know what the most popular data sets are. We want to be sure to know that we have stewards assigned to those data sets so that we can really focus in on where we're adding value instead of just trying to provide context and metadata for everything. We want to focus on what's most important, and Alation's metrics with these stewardship dashboards really helps find those targeted data sets that are going to give us the most value right away and provide the most impact for the business users. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Amy.
Thank you, Susannah. To close out, we're going to talk a little bit about the results and benefits that we've seen from using Alation and how it's helped us in our governance processes. we've really shifted what was previously seen as either an IT or a business analyst responsibility of documentation and cataloging from our original people accountable for doing that back to our business areas. That is really important that it's the people that are closest to the content and understand the work are doing that. And this has helped us with that shift, which just ultimately, as Susannah mentioned, adds quality to the content of Alation itself. We want to make sure that people are able to answer questions on their own. So as I mentioned, or as Susannah mentioned earlier around efficiency in process, we also have an example that I'm going to share that identifies a data scientist who had cut down on the number of requests that were sent to him by 25%. So he had a very active queue of people who were just curious about what he knew, what he had done, and just outstanding questions for him. So having Alation and getting that information out into a shareable software really helped him become more efficient and cut down on those questions. There's also a lot of knowledge at American Family that is really kind of stuck inside some walls. So we have, to our benefit, we have a lot of people who have a lot of tenure here. And I mean, 40, 45-year anniversaries, those people have a lot of knowledge. And without this kind of tool for them to share this information out, it tends to stay in their brain and then they retire. We don't want that kind of knowledge leaving the organization. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of SharePoint sites or wikis or Excel documents or drives that held specific information for individuals or for lines of business that people didn't even know about. So this allows, this tool allows that expertise and siloed information to get out and be shared across the organization. We also have a lot of support from our leaders, our data leaders in the organization, where they want to make sure that individuals are adding content to the tool. As I mentioned earlier, this was an enterprise effort among business leaders to bring this tool in. So they continue to be very supportive of ensuring that the content that we add is valuable and that it's added, period. So we're setting standards and expectations that we cannot deliver data sets or projects without having Alation content added as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Susannah gave the example of the glossary approval, and then I mentioned the data scientist. There's naturally productivity once you pull together the bullets from above. So we've really seen a lot of efficiency add and cost reductions and ultimately greater output as a result of having the tool.
All right, Amy, thank you so very much. First of all, great overview here. Thank you for walking us through your governance journey more broadly and more specifically your governance journey with Alation. I think it's such a great story, and we thank you for sharing it. A couple of things I want to point out here on this slide before we get into Q&A, and if you do have questions, please do chat them in now. On this slide, what we're really just showing is that beyond all the features that Susannah in particular covered a few minutes ago, sort of mapping to those stewardship challenges and how Alation solves for them, there are a host of other capabilities within the tool that we have as well that were not covered, but that are covered in part of our product launch last week. And obviously, we'd love to have a follow-up conversation with folks on that. And the second thing is around the Get Guided Help. That is really for organizations at any stage, but especially if you may be having questions around, again, that process flow, getting that process flow right between various stakeholders on your governance and stewardship journey. We'd love to have that conversation with you. We have what is called an accelerator that where we bring in our professional services folks and can certainly help you through that journey. So just those two things on this slide. I think we can probably conclude here with the next slide and get into Q&A. I'm seeing a few questions rolling in, and I think Nolan can help moderate some of that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy and Susannah. So there are questions rolling in. If you have a question, feel free to enter those into the box there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can in the next 14 minutes or so. To start out, though, for Amy and Susannah, so it's pretty clear that the work of stewards is important, and the work of the governance team is really important for the organization. How do you raise the profile of the work that they're doing to the larger organization?
So we have a lot of different events to start with, where we share out the content that people are adding. We've set up communication channels such as like Yammer groups or Slack channels where people can share out what they're doing, and we're beginning to establish communities of practice around our user groups. But one of the main things that we found is that those early users, those early adopters, kind of the self-identified stewards, they really become evangelists for Alation in and of themselves, because they're so excited to have the place to put the content that they need and to share it with each other. And so that it's that word of mouth that starts to kind of grow organically from that bottom-up usage and that excitement that people have. That seems to do the most to promote the tool.
Thank you. So here's another question, and maybe this is good and speaks to your overall journey. So if you were going to start this process from the beginning again, what would you do differently?
I think I can take that one. I think that perhaps we might have tried to tackle too much initially. If we hadn't maybe were focused on one or two domains instead of trying to replicate our previous metadata repository content all at once, that we might have been able to kind of build a little bit different way of method of adoption. So that would probably be the one difference that we'd make, but we had that experience of our initial metadata repository where we just went out and we're going to inventory all of Greenplum, now we're going to inventory all of Oracle, and we kind of use that same approach, and I'm not sure that I would use that approach again if we were starting from scratch.
Got it. Here's another question for you about your journey. So obviously you've gotten to a point of great maturity with your governance organization. How long did that process take, and were there any key milestones that you would point to for people who are looking to follow along the same journey?
I feel like one of the key milestones that we met was after about 1.5 years or 2 years of really working closely with our stewardship group, we really had a robust business glossary in place and defined, and those things were aligned to different domains and subdomains of information. And that kind of gave us almost like a logical framework for the information itself, and kind of having that in place really helped us begin to sort of put the conversations and the questions that arose into context and to kind of narrow down the focus of who needed to be involved in some of those discussions. And when we were able to start doing that more efficiently, we were able to have meaningful discussions and deliberations, and decisions were able to be made more quickly, because initially we would take it to the entire group and we didn't necessarily need consensus from everyone. And we sort of learned that over time, and learning who needed to be involved in which questions really helped us focus our governance efforts and make them more effective.
I'm going to add a little bit to that one too, and just to go back to a comment or one of the slides earlier. I can't stress enough how valuable it is to have business stakeholder collaboration as your driver. You can accomplish smaller things with 1 or 2 people, but when you have 12 people in a room representing all of, or the majority of, the data needs of the organization, and they're working together to get support, to get dollars, to gain attention, to find individuals to help you on your, whether it's an entire data governance journey or just, a component like the catalog, that I think was incredibly important. And I'm not sure I'd call it as a milestone as much as a catalyst for doing the right things at the right time for the right reasons for the organization.
Excellent. So here's a question that maybe speaks to the other side of that. I don't know if you have experience with this. So this person is saying, they are having trouble communicating the business value of governance to their IT team. Is that something that you've sort of grappled with? Do you have any thoughts there?
Sure. I think, I guess just first of all, every organization is set up a little bit differently. So it's not as much about, of course, it's not much about how you're organized, but who's doing the work and who sees the importance in it. One way that we started to address that was we have requirements for data quality on top of some of our data sets that exist in our warehouse today. And we had those rules identified by our business users, and we put out a dashboard that was at a table level and at a column level that showed the value or the accuracy of each of those components. And then the overall score for those either data sets or columns was the lowest of all the scores. So if you had a table that had 10 columns in it, they were all 100% accurate except for one, which was 10. The score of the table was 10. Once we could tie that to defects, that starts to create a very real, tangible picture for how you tie what code is being delivered into production to the value of tracking and understanding quality inside specific data sets that business users are consuming. I think if you can start to have conversations that are in the context of how those two things relate and make it very specific to how IT areas have certain measures that they track today, whether it's defects, whether it's implementation, whether it's if there's some sort of SLA, there's just an automatic connection there. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right words to make it resonate with all of the parties included. And that's just the data quality example of it. I also had an IT person on the way down walking to lunch today say, hey, I was in Alation today trying to understand the impacts if I change X, Y, and Z. And I was like, awesome. So some of it too is just finding the right pathway in to a problem that a person has or some issue that they're trying to solve. And again, those advocates that Susannah mentioned are so important, because if you get some of your leaders in the IT area on board and show them how the tool adds value or governance adds value, that word of mouth is really what makes the difference, because people trust. Getting those people that are trusted on board really paves the way for success.
Excellent. That's interesting. So you mentioned that analytic stewards, the people who were sort of self-selecting as analytic stewards, were really excited about Alation. But it sounds like as you're seeing success, that more people in the company who maybe Alation wasn't originally sort of meant for them are finding value in it as well.
I would say that that's definitely true. I think that in a lot of ways, we're finding Alation evolving to be more than just a data catalog. It's actually becoming a knowledge management platform for all information about data. So there may be people who don't actually use the data itself, but they make decisions based on the the numbers that are given to them, but they don't necessarily know where those numbers come from. So they're able to go in and learn more about the data and become more find the context of it to figure out how it's calculated, where it comes from, what it means, who's doing that work, the teams that do that work, how they do it. All of that is being put within the catalog so that people can see everything kind of from start to finish. So it's really becoming a learning tool as much as it is a data catalog, and that's really important to our emphasis on data literacy throughout the entire enterprise.
So here's a question asking for a little bit more elaboration. You spoke about incorporating performance goals for stewards as a result and a benefit. And this person is asking if you could talk about that more. Who assigned those goals? How do you make sure they see those goals? How do you make sure that they're being met or not being met?
So when we first talked about bringing in Alation, had it implemented, there were some different ideas on how do we make sure that it continues to get updated. So it's not like, hey, great, we have this really exciting new tool, and we kind of go through that initial pass and then everything becomes stale. If you remember, I talked about how we have our group, our cohort of enterprise data users that exist inside our business areas, and then really our data stewards are in our business areas as well. So as we bring forward ideas to understand how we can keep this work moving and continuing to move forward and stay fresh, it's that group of individuals that we're going to work with to see what types of measures we can put out there. One is we don't want somebody just to, go out and type the policy number is a number of a policy, and then that gets counted as documentation. So we have to figure out how to ensure that it's valid, reusable, helpful, informational content, not just content for content's sake. So one other, yeah, that's all I was going to say. Sorry. So it's really about how do we work with our business partners who are ultimately accountable for the data stewards to make sure that happens. And that's something we're working through. We have support now, but we don't have it documented as individual goals across the organization quite yet.
Excellent. So we've probably got time for about one more, maybe more than that question. Let's see what we can get to. So for Amy and Susannah, where do you think Alation is making the biggest difference or biggest impact to your governance and stewardship program?
Gosh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
I would say definitely time. It's much easier for people, for the stewards in particular, to find information about the data. So one of the things Amy hit on was that it's hard for stewards to understand things at a granular level. So our stewards are responsible for approving access requests to different data sets. So Alation allows them to very quickly see, does this data is there sensitive data here that I'm giving access to? The person requesting it, if they're an Alation user, I can see their profile, I can see who it is that's requesting access, the kind of analytics that they do. So I really feel like it's enabling the stewards to make better informed decisions, where in the past they would have to do that by contacting people, sending email, and it would delay those requests for access. So it's helping the stewards. It's also helping the people who are requesting access to data.
I think in addition to that too, it also adds transparency into expectations around policies, where when we talk about data quality or we talk about records retention, if that information is available in Alation, then if someone's going out to use that content and needs to do some research or understand what's available to them, when it's all in one place like that, it just naturally draws a connection without people realizing that they're aligning to, a governance policy or standard. I think that's one of the things we want to focus on, is making sure or trying to create governance that's invisible, So how do we make sure we're aligning to our policies in either an automated way, a way that just becomes a way of life, a way that doesn't feel like it's, oh, I've done my job and now I have to go do this extra thing. Alation really helps bring all of that together so it becomes one complete package, as opposed to right now it's seen as sometimes isolated individual steps, and governance or security or naming standards or quality seem to be their own unique different isolated focus areas, where if we can bring that all together and it becomes naturally a way of life, then that allows us to align to our practices and create that environment that we want to create with accurate, timely data, making the best decisions for the organization. And that's just part of everyone's DNA.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So thank you everybody who attended today's webinar. That's the last question we'll have time for. Really thank you to Amy and Susannah for joining today and providing your insights. And thank you to Mitesh for explaining analytic stewardship. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all of your questions. We'll try to follow up with you if possible. But if you would like more information on analytic stewardship, you can go to alation.com/analytics-stewardship. We've got a number of resources there for you. And if you're an Alation customer, there's a conversation happening on the Alation community, and we encourage you to go there and continue the discussion. Thank you, everybody who joined, and thank you to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.